Hi there, I'm Savannah Mexto with Mannor Law Group, and I'm excited to welcome you to another Webinar Wednesday with esteemed elder law and estate planning attorney, Robert Mannor. On today's webinar, Bob will be discussing long-term care Medicaid. What is this benefit, and can it help you or your loved one afford the ever-growing costs of long-term care? Before I pass the torch to Bob, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping details. First, a disclaimer, and Bob will touch on this again, but today you won't be able to receive specific legal advice. Today it's going to be educational. You'll definitely learn something new. But if you're looking for unique legal advice for your situation, I encourage you to contact us after the webinar, and we will give you an easy way to get a hold of us after the webinar. More to come with that. Also, note that today's webinar is recorded. After today, well, actually tomorrow, we'll send you a link for the replay for today's webinar, and you'll be able to share this with family and friends. And again, we'll follow up with you after the webinar today just to kind of touch base and remind you that that's coming. Now, if you do have questions today, I encourage you to leave those questions in the chat box. I'll be standing by while Bob is presenting to track questions, answer questions if I can in the chat, and then make sure that Bob has a chance to answer those questions during the webinar as well. If we don't get to your question, then again, we'll follow up with you after the webinar, or you can always reach out to us. Now, why should you listen to what the folks at Mannor Law Group have to say? Now, first, I'd like you to note that we're a nationally recognized and respected elder law and estate planning firm. All three of our attorneys are accredited by the Veterans Administration to assist veterans with claims and appeals. Attorney Bob Mannor is nationally board certified as an elder law attorney by the National Elder Law Foundation. He's one of only 19 attorneys in Michigan to achieve this designation. He's currently on the executive board of the State Bar of Michigan Elder Law and Disability Rights Section and past president of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys Michigan chapter. Also, Mannor Law Group is honored by readers of our local paper as the best or favorite law firm for the last 8 years in a row. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome attorney Bob Mannor.
All right, let's go ahead and get started here. So I've divided this into a few different topics here, and the topics are, let's see, here we go. There we go. So the topics are, will I lose everything if I have to go to a nursing home? We're going to kind of talk a little bit about the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. Those are often confused, and sometimes we're assuming that maybe everything would be covered by Medicare or our Blue Cross. So we'll kind of talk about that. How do you protect yourself and your family from losing assets, from losing everything potentially, from the cost of nursing home? And what exactly does Medicaid pay for? So we're going to talk about the different programs for Medicaid, and there's really kind of two categories. One is going to be paying for a nursing home, and the other is home care. And we're going to talk about those home care options too. And then one of the things I always like to talk about, and I think it's really important, when we hear the word Medicaid, sometimes there's a certain amount of people have just some feelings about that. And so the question is it fair for me to get Medicaid and protect my assets? So I want to address that. I think you're going to find that perspective to be a little bit interesting, and maybe some things that you hadn't thought about prior to this. So let's go ahead and get right into this. And as Savannah mentioned, we always have a disclaimer on here. This is all going to be good information, but your specific information is going to be unique. And so it's often like going to a doctor, and maybe you've seen a prescription on TV and you ask about that prescription, and hopefully if it's a good doctor, the doctor's not going to just write you a prescription without asking any questions or doing any tests. They're going to apply it to you if it's appropriate, but not if it's not appropriate. And so this is general information. It should not be considered legal advice for your specific needs without consultation with us. So, and we will have you have an opportunity to do that. So the first thing I want to talk about is the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. And so this is a really good and important thing. Unfortunately, in government and law, there's so many times that they are making it so that everything sounds very similar. And what I mean by that is that we have different things that have very similar sounding names. And so frequently when I'm having a conversation with folks, they will switch between Medicare and Medicaid and kind of make them interchangeable. And they are actually separate programs. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We'll do another webinar a different day on Medicare. That's a really interesting topic too, and we can address that. And one of the things that can be really interesting and very helpful for you is if you understand Medicare and understand, okay, what are your options as it relates to getting supplemental insurance or getting Medicare Advantage insurance, Blue Cross in addition to Medicare. We'll actually address that on a separate webinar. So today we're just going to kind of talk about Medicare. There's really, for the most part, there's going to be two classifications of who gets Medicare. It's going to be one, people over age 65. All right, and then we can talk about the different parts of the different types of Medicare, but people over age 65, and then under the right circumstances, people who are receiving some form of disability through Social Security. So often when I'm talking about Medicaid, and let's say somebody went into a nursing home, often people will mistake and say, well, will Medicare pay for it? Or then they'll combine the word Medicare with Social Security and say, well, Social Security is the process through Social Security. Well, these are all different programs and they all have different rules, and we're going to talk about that. So many of you are familiar with the idea of Medicare, especially if you're over 65 or approaching 65. You would have hopefully gotten some information about this. And on another day, we'll talk about what are the best options for insurance, and I don't sell any of that stuff, so I can give you some independent thoughts on it, and why sometimes a Medigap policy might be better, and sometimes a Medicare Advantage policy might be better. And so it's actually broken into 4 different parts: Part A, Part B, Part C, and Part D. Part A is the hospital insurance. Part B is the medical insurance, meaning going to the doctor, things like that. Part C actually encompasses Part A and Part B. It's a Medicare Advantage program. So it's a lot of folks are moving to this, where they're actually having Part C kind of take over for their Part A and Part B. And sometimes Part C can incorporate Part D, which is the prescription coverage. So if you have Part A and Part B but don't have Part C, then you may end up, you probably would participate in Part D, which is the prescription coverage. But if you have Part C, it can incorporate the 3 others, depending on your particular plan, your particular Advantage plan that you have through your insurance. Now, if that sounds confusing, don't worry about it. That's something we'll address on another day. Keep a watch for the other webinar Wednesdays where we're going to address that specifically. But I don't want to spend too much time on Medicare. I just want to kind of compare and contrast that to Medicaid. And so Medicare, we're talking about hospitalization, going to the doctor. It actually includes hospice, which sometimes people get confused and think that hospice is going to cover their nursing home costs. And that's a rare, very rare situation where hospice will cover your nursing home costs. But Medicaid is actually a program where it is a state and federal program, whereas Medicare is strictly a federal program. Medicaid is a state and federal program. So anything, if you happen to be watching, I don't think you are, but if you happen to be watching from out of state or you're not a Michigan resident, the presentation today will not apply to you, because what we're going to be talking about is Medicaid as it applies in the state of Michigan. And this is really important because we have 50 different Medicaid programs, actually much more than that, but as far as the interpretation of it, 50 different interpretations of the Medicaid program, because Michigan rules are going to be different than Ohio rules, or are going to be different than Florida rules. So what we're going to be talking about today is how the federal and state program works in Michigan. And you notice one of the big ones on here is nursing home. It covers nursing home. Medicare only covers nursing home if you're receiving skilled care, meaning physical therapy, occupational therapy, things like that. So this is a really important distinction. One of the things, if you can leave here today and remember one thing, if you ever have to go, or you have a loved one goes to a rehab facility, so you're in the hospital says, oh, you should go to rehab first, you should go for physical therapy first. And with the physical therapy, then they say at some point, they'll say, oh, you need to go to a rehab place for physical therapy, for occupational therapy, for speech therapy, those types of things. Medicare can cover that. Medicare, Blue Cross, your insurance, often can cover that for some period of time. And then when that period of time is over, and sometimes it feels like it's over too quickly, that you really do need more rehab, then with that, they'll often say they're discharging you. So if you're in a care facility that is doing rehab and doing physical therapy, and they say, we're discharging you, what you have to understand, and this is a really important distinction that almost nobody understands this, is when the facility says they're discharging you, that does not mean you need to leave the facility. And so it sounds like if we were speaking English, when they say discharge, and they will often even say, discharge, come pick him up on Thursday, come pick Dad up on Thursday, come pick Mom up on Thursday, because he's discharged on Thursday. But what you have to understand from the law standpoint is actually the discharge just means we're discharged from the Medicare portion of things. We're discharged from the rehab portion of things. That doesn't mean that we can't stay in the facility if it's an appropriate care facility for us. And often the folks won't tell you that, even the folks at the care facility. And, there's lots of reasons why, but the bottom line is that is the law. That's how it works. And you are able to switch over to Medicaid at that point. We're going to talk about that process of switching from your Blue Cross over to Medicaid and stay at that care facility if it's appropriate, even once they say they're discharging you, because the discharge is actually not leaving the facility, although they will often make it sound like that. And so discharge from your rehab just means Medicare is no longer going to pay for it. But we could choose to stay there in private pay, or we can choose to stay there and get Medicaid to pay for it. And we're going to talk about that process of getting Medicaid to pay for it, okay? So Medicaid can cover nursing home. There's some at-home Medicaid benefits that are long-term care benefits. It can cover, drugs and durable medical equipment not covered by Medicare. Depending on the state and depending on the, arrangements that they have through the state, it can be vision, dental, home and community-based services. Those are all going to be state to state. So we're going to talk about some of those home and community-based services in Michigan, and some of those are a really good option. Okay, so I just first wanted to make that distinction between Medicare and Medicaid, and actually we're going to go through a few other things that talk about that distinction. So how are Medicare and Medicaid different? Some of this is going to be kind of a recap of what we were just talking. Medicare is a national program. It's based on federal law. Should be the same in Michigan as it is in Florida or California or Arizona. Medicare is basically health insurance for people over 65. But if you have Medicare, hopefully, and I would strongly recommend, you have additional insurance too. Okay, so you still need your Blue Cross. It's just that Medicare is the primary provider of it, right? So they will provide, for example, under traditional Medicare, it's often 80% of the fee. Well, 80% of a hospital stay, you could still have several $1,000s, sometimes tens of $1,000s in hospital bills if you just have Medicare and don't have any supplemental insurance, don't have any additional insurance beyond Medicare. So I strongly recommend that you can have Medicare, and it's one of those things that we can kind of talk you through. We'll do a webinar on this about, well, how do you pick the other insurance, and how do you, when you're making that decision, when can you switch insurances, all those types of things. We will do that on a different day. It is the nation's primary provider, payer of inpatient hospital services to the disabled and elderly. Medicaid, on the other hand, is state by state. It is a federal state program. It's paid for by both federal and state dollars, and it's subject to both federal and state rules. So the rules in Michigan can be significantly different than other states. It's health insurance, and it's based on need, and we're going to talk about what that means, based on need. And this is really interesting. That's why I put an arrow there. It's the nation's primary payer, public payer of acute healthcare, mental health care, and long-term care services. All right, so that's really interesting, right? So a lot of people, you have, in this area, there's probably in the region that I'm typically dealing with, there could be at least 15 nursing homes right in this area. If you go a little bit further, we'll probably find 40 nursing homes right in this area. And, all the people in there, what's interesting is Medicaid is the primary payer of long-term care. When somebody has to stay there more than just their rehab stay, Medicaid is the primary payer of that. So when people think, oh, well, this other person must be private paying, I see that their spouse is driving up in a nice car and has a house and things like that, they must have the money to pay for it. That's often not the case, often because Medicaid is the primary payer of those long-term care services. I thought this was just an interesting statistic here. There's actually more people on Medicaid in the United States than there is on Medicare. And there's 9.2 million. This is as of 2013, so it's about 7 years old. But there's 9.2 million that have both Medicare and Medicaid. And there's certain circumstances that we can talk about that as to why you would get both and when you would get both. And there's some complications of getting both. Sometimes if we can qualify for Medicare, we just want Medicare and we wouldn't want Medicaid. Sometimes we want both. It's going to depend on your unique circumstances. But I thought that was an interesting statistic to point out that more people are actually on Medicaid than Medicare. Going to kind of circle back to that at the end of the presentation when we talk about whether it's appropriate or fair to plan and protect yourself to qualify for Medicaid so you don't lose everything to pay for nursing home or home care. So long-term care process is long-term care planning is the process of planning for your future. And the planning for the future is to maintain independence, dignity, choice, quality of care, okay, quality of life, and protection of your nest egg. So a lot of times people think I'm just going to be talking to them about their money, but yeah, money's important. It is. It's the way it is. It's important, and we got to talk about that, and we've got to protect it. We got to protect your house. We got to protect your money. That's not the only answer, right? If it's a matter of, oh, well, we can protect your house and your money, but you're going to be cared for by, in this terrible place that smells and is bad and is 3 hours away from your family and all these other things, then that's not okay. I could probably come up with a plan to protect assets in most cases, but it's not what we want. And so we got to kind of balance all these things. Independence means making sure you get to make your own decisions as long as you're physically and mentally able to do that. Dignity, quality of life, choice, okay? Every once in a while, not every once in a while, all the time, I'll hear people say, oh, well, I would never want to go on Medicaid because I've seen some of those Medicaid nursing homes. Yeah, I've seen some of them too, and I've seen others. And the point of it is every nursing home, what's defined in my definition of a nursing home, is a skilled care facility. So they offer medical care. They have somebody on that has medical, knowledge or has medical care 24 hours a day. If you're in Michigan and you provide 24-hour, there's somebody in the building that is licensed as a medical care provider, whether it be a nurse or it doesn't have to be a doctor, but they offer some form of medical care 24 hours a day. And it's not a hospital, it's a long-term care facility. Then they have to be licensed as a skilled care facility or what I would call a nursing home. So what's interesting is every nursing home in Michigan, every rehab facility in Michigan is required to take both Medicare and Medicaid. And so if you ever had to stay in a place that you say, well, this is pretty nice, that, this place, they have lots of windows, it smells nice, it's a really nice building, they just built it last year, whatever that is, that place takes Medicaid. And so when people say, oh, well, I would never want to stay in a Medicaid facility. Yeah, that new place that smells really nice and serves Starbucks coffee, they take Medicaid. Now, they may not advertise it. They may, they may prefer to take those short-term patients that pay more or private pay patients that pay more, but they are required under law to take Medicaid, and you can stay there. So just because you say, don't think that if you're on Medicaid that it's only going to be the nasty places. Now, does that mean there's no nasty places out there? No, that doesn't mean that. There are some places out there that are less great, and honestly, it's the minority of them. The majority of them do a really great job of making sure it's clean and smells good, and they're taking good care of their patients and their residents. But there's a few that I would warn people against, and I wouldn't want people to go there because I walk in and there's a smell. And like I said, this is not the majority of them. The majority of them do a really great job and they work really hard. And I suspect even the ones that are kind of bad, they still work really hard. It's just that maybe their corporate office isn't giving them the resources that they need. But it's really a small minority of the ones that I would say, boy, I wouldn't recommend that you go there. So that's something to think about. And it's my point on this is it's just not just about money, right? Oh, but I'm never going to a nursing home, right? How many people have you heard say that? I've heard people say that a lot. In fact, I probably even, said it myself or said it to my parents. And the bottom line is we can't always guarantee that. Even if we promise that, honestly, we can't guarantee that. And there's a couple of reasons why. One is the level of care that might be necessary. If the level of care is so much that we need skilled care or we need 24-hour care, we have to consider it. And people say, oh, I'm always just going to have to be in my home. That's great, and we should try for that. And that's the majority of the time, that's what we're going to go for, is stay in your home, maybe get some care brought into your home. But the reality is sometimes that's not enough. That's just not enough care. And the second reason is money. And unfortunately, that's the case. So, I had a client one time, she's long since passed, but she was getting 24-hour care with at least 2 people at any given time. And she was getting real good care, and they were making sure, the family was making sure she was getting real good care, and they would switch out caregivers when they felt that the caregivers were not doing the job, and sometimes they had to switch companies and things like that. And they just did a real good job, and she was spending about $29,000 a month for that care. Most of us couldn't do that, right? Most of us couldn't afford that. And so sometimes the answer is, yeah, if we want good care, sometimes we need a rotating staff of 3 shifts and multiple people, and you can't get that in your home. You're not going to get a multiple people with 3 shifts that are going to be able to take care in your home. And so sometimes it is just it's just the right option, and sometimes it's just because we can't afford the care in our home, and we can get help to pay for care in a nursing home sometimes easier than at home. But we're going to talk about getting help to get care in your home too. That's certainly going to be one of the things that we're going to discuss. So I think these statistics are interesting. The Congressional Budget Office actually, it was quite a while ago, it was 2009, they did this study. So if you're familiar with the Congressional Budget Office, it's a part of Congress where they evaluate things and do statistics. And so they came up with these statistics that about 70% of us will require some kind of long-term care during our life. So what does that mean? Think about that. 70%, 7 out of 10 of us are going to need some kind of long-term care. What does that? Think about that. Because a lot of us have this idea that we're going to die in our home with our boots on and that we're going to be in charge and we're going to be in control for the rest of our life, to our dying day, to our last second. We're in charge. We get to make our own decisions. Okay, and that's hopefully, God forbid it's not that. We all want that, right? We all want that. But 70% of us will be dependent on somebody else for our daily needs, our daily care. And 70% of us, probably that means that most of that 70% of us aren't able to make all of our own decisions. At some point before we die, we're going to have to be dependent on somebody else to make decisions for us and to help us provide for our daily needs. How many people have planned for that? We plan for all these different stages in our life. We plan for when we get out of school. We plan for getting married. We plan for having kids. We plan for retirement, right? Sometimes we plan for years for retirement. But then somehow we get into retirement, and then we don't think that we have to have this plan for this last stage of life that 70% of us are going to go through. And that's what we do at Mannor Law Group. We help you plan for all of those things, all of those stages of life. But one of the things that we do differently than most lawyers and most people aren't preparing for that last part that 70% of us are going to need. And so often our planning is going to be a little bit different. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, about how our planning is different from your will and from your trust and your other documents that you might have gotten through another attorney. It's because we are, in addition to focusing on all the things that are important about, what happens after you die, and can we avoid probate, and how do we make sure that you got people to be able to pay your bills for you. It's also focusing on how do we deal with that last stage. If most of us are going to be dependent on somebody else before we die, how do we plan for that? And there are legal things that you have to do or should do to prepare for that. So in just a couple of minutes, we're going to talk about what you need to do about that. Other statistics from that study, 40% of us will end up being in a skilled care facility, a nursing home. So remember earlier I was saying those skilled care facilities that provide 24-hour care, 40% of us will spend some time. 20% of us will need long-term care for more than 5 years. So long-term care can be pretty darn expensive. And if we're going to have to pay for 5 years or more of that, 20% of us, 1 in 5 of us, going to have to pay for more than 5 years of care. And some people think, we talked about Medicare earlier, we talked about Blue Cross or your insurance. Some people think, oh, well, doesn't Medicare cover that? Sure, it does not. It does not. And so that might be unfair. We're going to talk about that later on about, why Medicaid is important and why planning for Medicaid is important. Because we all kind of count on Medicare and our insurance, Blue Cross, but guess what? Medicare and Blue Cross aren't going to pay for that. They're not going to pay for long-term care, extended care. So we're going to talk about how you can get that paid for, or help paying for it. All right, so how does Medicaid work? So we're going to talk about this, and some of you, if you've done any research on this, and I bet you some of you have, you've done some Googling or you talk to friends about, okay, if I got on Medicaid, what can I keep? What am I going to lose if I get on Medicaid? So I talked about how does Medicaid work, but before we talk about this slide, and I will talk about this slide, I always like to put a big X over this, okay? So everything that you've learned and everything that everybody's told you about Medicaid is true, but only partially true. It's not the whole thing, because most people, and I'm going to say whether it's a social worker or whether it's a banker or whether it's another lawyer or whether it's your neighbor who went through this, they're going to give you this information. What I'm telling you is, with every single government program that I've ever been aware of, there's things you can do to improve your situation, right? So you can go with the default. This is the default. And my answer is don't. Don't go with this default. This is the bottom line if you don't do anything to protect yourself. So I'm going to go back through this in a second here. But my point on it is, if we're ever looking at Medicaid or ever looking at long-term care, you need to come in for a consultation and we can talk to you about, okay, how can we use this law to our advantage? And I said that exactly the way I meant it. How do we use this law to our advantage? And I like to compare this to, we often hear about politicians or rich folks that don't pay very many taxes, right? We hear this all the time, especially during a presidential election. They'll talk about pretty much everybody that's seriously running for president pays a lower percentage of taxes than their income would indicate, right? And so the famous one was the really rich guy that has that hedge fund or whatever it is. I can't think of his name right now, but he came out and he said, yeah, my secretary pays a much higher percentage of taxes than I do. He was, just kind of using himself as an example. And Warren Buffett said this. So he's a billionaire, he's a multi-billionaire. And he was indicating, yeah, his secretary pays a higher percentage of taxes than he does. And so, and I bet you he didn't change that. After he said that's probably a wrong system, he didn't change that. He didn't voluntarily pay more taxes after that. And everybody that can, for the most part, everybody that can does work with accountants, work with lawyers to make sure that if they can pay less taxes, they will. And they do it legally. They find out ways within the law. Now, others, they just let basically the IRS figure out their taxes, okay? So if we had the ability to use the tax law in our favor to pay less taxes, we probably would. Well, guess what? You have the ability when it comes to Medicaid. We do the same thing with veterans benefits, for example. And the law is the law, but buried in the law is all of these safe harbors and all of these deductions and all of these protections. And if you don't know the law really well, and who does, especially when it comes to Medicaid, because they keep changing the law. Even most lawyers don't know the law. Most lawyers that practice Medicaid in a serious way, this is the, they have to focus almost entirely on Medicaid and estate planning, because they keep changing the law on us, and they change it all the time, and it's very complicated. But guess what? That's my job. That's my job, is to figure out where in the law we can do things to protect you. And so we're going to talk about the default. If you choose to not do anything to protect yourself and your family, you can do that. And here's the results of that. Okay. The results of, oops, that didn't work. Let's go back. I thought I had another slide there. So let's go to the back to the slide that doesn't have the X over it. That should show up in a second there. Okay. So the idea here is, again, this is only if you're not doing anything to protect yourself. Here's what you're left with. Guess what? It seems like a good thing, right? Everybody says this. Oh, you get to keep your house. All right. But if you're a single person, you get to keep your house, but they're going to take all your income. They're going to leave you with $2 a day. $2 a day. $60 a month. So are you going to be able to maintain your house, taxes, insurance, upkeep, mowing the lawn, getting the snow out of the driveway on $2 a day? No, they're going to take all your income. This is what, if you don't do anything to protect yourself, all of your income, they let you keep your house. But it gets worse. So not only are you not have a way of maintaining and paying for the house if you're to get Medicaid, they're also going to come back and take it after you die. They call this estate recovery. And so if you don't do anything to protect your house, now there's ways to protect it. I'm going to tell you, there's clear ways that we can protect your house and other assets and still qualify for Medicaid. But if you don't take those actions, if you don't do something to protect your house, they will take the proceeds from the sale of the house after you die. So they don't give you money to maintain it during your lifetime, and they're going to take it after your death. Because what happens a lot of times, I've seen this so many times, mom goes into a nursing home and had a house, and the kids are told, oh, well, the house is exempt, you get to keep the house. But then the kids start paying the taxes and mowing the lawn and maintaining the property and doing all these things. And then what happens? Mom dies, house is subject to estate recovery. They lose the proceeds from the house. They don't even get repaid for the money they put in to maintain the house. Okay, it doesn't have to be that way. We can fix this, but you have to take affirmative action to do that. Okay, you have to take active action, meaning that you have to come in and get a consult from us. And this is not common knowledge, and there's a couple reasons why this is not common knowledge. A lot of people want to go to Google and get all their answers from the computer, from the internet, right? And there's a problem with that. You're not going to get these answers from Google. You're not going to get these answers from the internet. Why? Well, there's several reasons. Number one is they change the laws frequently. So if I put something out there that says, here's how to do it, it's going to be out of date sometimes in 3 months. Number two, it changes from state to state. So if I put something out there that says how to do this, and somebody in Ohio or Florida relies on it, they're going to be in bad shape. So it's actually, it's not going to work. And number three is that it can be kind of complicated here. And so this is not a self-help approach. You do need somebody that knows this law, that does it every day, and then we can protect you. We can protect your house, we can protect your assets, and we can protect those things. And there's things you should do now, and there's things that you should do if and when this happens. And so we're going to talk about that. So what else can you keep? You can keep the house, sort of. You get $2 a day out of your income. You can have $2,000 in total assets, and that's everything. That's life insurance, that's savings bonds, that's annuities. Sometimes people say, oh, annuities are exempt from Medicaid. No, they're not. No, they're not. They are not exempt from Medicaid. I have had people that have told me that the person that sold them the annuity told them it was exempt from Medicaid. It is absolutely not exempt from Medicaid. Okay, so $2,000 in total assets, one car, one prepaid funeral, one life insurance policy with a face value of no more than $1,500, and household goods. They let you keep your wedding ring. Okay, but household goods, if you still have a house, they'd let you keep your TV and all of that. What can you lose? Pretty much everything else. All right, so in a minute we're going to talk about how do you protect those things. But before that, I wanted to give you a quick story here. Oh yeah, first, it gets worse. You didn't think it was just that bad. It gets worse. Medicaid will penalize you for transfers or things that they didn't like you did for the last 5 years. So sometimes people think, oh, I can just give the money away to my kids, or I can just move it over to my spouse, or things like that, or I can just hide the money. And sometimes people say, well, how will they know? How will they know if I hide the money? Well, first of all, you've got two problems. One, it's a felony, and my strong advice, my legal advice. I told you I wasn't going to give you any legal advice. I'll give you one piece of legal advice today. Don't commit a felony. And I'm serious about it. It's a felony if you hide money and then apply for Medicaid. That's not a good idea. What we're doing is not hiding money. What we're doing is following the law to protect your money. Guess what? They've written this stuff into the law, and we just have to apply it properly. Okay? And so the idea here is that Medicaid will look back 5 years and see what you did with your money. And they're the government, and the government's getting more and more able to see pretty much anything. And certainly if it involves a bank account, if it involves where money came into your account or that you received it through Social Security or something else, they're going to see that money. And if all of a sudden it disappears, they're going to ask you questions. And they're going to say, okay, we're going to look at what you did for the last 5 years. And if we don't like it, we can penalize you. And so the penalty is for every $8,469 that you either gave away or they don't like what you did with it, they will penalize you 1 month of the cost of the nursing home. Okay. And so, or your otherwise care. We're going to talk about home care in a minute. So that's really important. Now, don't panic. If you've done stuff last year, don't panic. That's what lawyers are for, right? We can help figure out how do we deal with it last year. So what I'm telling you is going forward, we can only worry about tomorrow. We can't worry about yesterday, right? So going forward, we got to be careful about that. And you don't want to just give money away from the kids. Now, I always joke and say, look, if your kid's in jail and they need bail money, I suppose that's okay. But if you're just giving them money to hold on to it, you say to your son, hold this money. It's not yours, it's mine, but I'm going to give it to you. Guess what? That will not help you. That will not solve your problem. Okay. So they look back 5 years to see what you did with your money. One of the things people will sometimes say is, how would they know? How would they know what I did with it? How do they know I just didn't go to the casino? And here's my answer. They don't have to prove what you did with the money. You do. You have to prove what you did with the money. So they say, I see this money was there and now it's not there. What did you do with it? And if you can't prove it, then they're going to penalize you. Okay. And so that is the rule. So sometimes I'll be a little bit flippant about it and say, okay, it's kind of like, criminals, you're innocent until proven guilty. Well, with Medicaid, you're guilty until you can prove yourself innocent. And that's absolutely the truth. Okay. All right, so let's do a quick example here. We've got Sam and Lucy as my example. Sam and Lucy have been married for 61 years. Their children have passed away. Sam is a veteran. This is often we see a version of Sam and Lucy all the time. And my version of Sam and Lucy is one of them has medical or physical restrictions, and the other one has memory problems. So maybe one has Alzheimer's, another one is a fall risk. But they get by together. The one that needs them, that has the memory, can use the other one that has the physical ability, and they can get by together. And we see this all the time. Sometimes we refer to it as two halves make a whole. So, two halves meaning one person can do the physical things and one person can do the mental things, but because they're a married couple and they've been together for so long, they can do it together until they can't. And it will always come to that. Eventually it'll get to the point. And so my point is with Sam and Lucy is we need to get them into the office, or I strongly recommend we get them into the office before it gets to the point where the two halves don't make a whole anymore. Okay. Well, that's what happened with Sam and Lucy. It got to the point where Sam couldn't take care of Lucy anymore. And Lucy went into a nursing home. They had $400,000. They did all right. They'd saved up $400,000. They had a modest home and they had a car. All right. Now, someone tells them to apply for Medicaid because Lucy's now in a nursing home. And what did we say earlier? We said for nursing homes, guess what? Who's the biggest payer of most nursing home fees? It's Medicaid. For long-term care nursing home, the largest payer in the United States of who's paying that bill, it's Medicaid. So someone says apply for Medicaid. Well, they get denied, obviously. They had $400,000 and they didn't do anything to protect themselves. So they get denied. And they're told, oh, well, if you spend down to about $100,000, you can reapply. So they did. How quickly do you spend down from $400,000 to $100,000 if you're in a nursing home? Well, it takes less than 3 years. So Lucy had been, in a nursing home for more than 3 years. Less than 3 years, they're back. They're down to $100,000 or less, and now we reapply. So good news, Lucy gets approved, but there's a problem. They get a divestment penalty, and so Sam's doctor had told him that he shouldn't drive anymore. So he has this car, and what do grandpas do? What do grandpa and grandmas do sometimes? They give away their car because they're like, I don't need it anymore, and my granddaughter needs it to get to school, so they gave away their car. Well, guess what? That creates a penalty because there's a gift. They transferred an asset, and so they get approved, but subject to a spend down, subject to a penalty created by giving that car away. Also, they found out that Lucy had this life insurance policy, and sometimes they find it out because they knew about it. Sometimes they find it out because the Medicaid office finds out about it. They have this thing called asset verification now, and that's where I don't know what the actual process is, but in my head, when I think of this asset verification, I imagine this big supercomputer in some room somewhere, and they type in your name and social security, and then it tells you everything that you've ever done with any bank account and any account, and they come back with this stuff that sometimes people had forgotten about, and then we have to explain it and deal with it. So in this case, they found out that Lucy has a life insurance policy that her parents bought for her when she was a baby that has a face value of $2,000. Now that's going to come back and haunt us for a second. Well, since Sam and Lucy hadn't done anything to protect themselves, including making sure that we have the ability to get access to information and change things, they couldn't. The insurance company wouldn't talk to Sam or anyone else about it. They certainly couldn't cash it in, and Lucy wasn't capable of making that phone call. She no longer had the capability of calling the life insurance company and say, hey, let's cash this in, or whatever would be appropriate. So that's the story. So gets another issue here with Sam and Lucy is they got approved subject to that 2-month penalty, but then after 11 months, they have to reapply. Every year you have to reapply. They call it recertification. And so redetermination actually is the terminology. So he gets it, he fills it out, he sends it in, and he gets denied. Well, why on earth would he get denied? He's only got $28,000 left. And the answer is, oops, I didn't mean to click on that. The answer is why he gets denied with $28,000 is because he reported that he still had that joint account with Lucy. Well, that's what people do, right? Married couples that have been married for 61 years have a joint account. And no one told him he can't have Lucy's name on that account anymore. You can for the first year, but after the first year, you can't have Lucy's name on that account. So because he had Lucy's name, he's allowed to have that $28,000. He was allowed to have $100,000. But because he had Lucy's name on it, he gets denied benefits. And no one told him any otherwise. Well, by the time this all gets sorted out, he gets another $20,000 bill from the nursing home. So they started at $400,000. They're down to $8,000. Get another bill from the nursing home. What happens? And this has happened so many times in our office, you wouldn't believe this. Sam dies. Why does Sam die? Sam's not taking care of himself. He's so worried about money, so worried about everything else, doesn't feel like he has the money to take care of himself. Sam dies. Now what happens? Lucy's still alive. One of the things that people don't realize is it's often the healthier spouse, the one that's not in the nursing home, that dies first. It happens more than 50% of the time, according to the statistics. So the healthy one, I mean, Sam wasn't that healthy, but he was not in a nursing home. He's the one that dies first. Well, guess what? Now we have a problem because Medicaid's still not approved. We're now in a negative balance. And so the social worker applies and applies for Medicaid for Lucy. Guess what? Still get denied. How on earth can that be? How can you get denied Medicaid because of assets when you have negative assets? You owe more to the nursing home than you have. And the answer is that darn life insurance policy. So that life insurance policy, I don't need to jump ahead quite yet. That life insurance policy is a $2,000 life insurance policy. Well, because she has a $2,000 life insurance policy that has a face value of $2,000, that's what they bought it for, is $2,000. That's enough to get her denied. Even though there's negative assets to offset that, they don't count that. They say, well, you have a $2,000 life insurance policy, has a face value, you're denied. Okay, so outstanding balance continues to grow. What is the other alternative? So a few minutes ago, I made a big deal about how you really have to make sure that you got your things in order, you got your things in place. And that doesn't just mean having a will or a trust or having a power of attorney. It's more than that. We're going to talk about in just a second. We're going to talk about what do you need, okay? And the bottom line is Sam and Lucy did some proactive planning. They came in advance and they did some basic estate planning. They didn't even do anything too complicated. We've got complicated plans. We've got simpler plans. Lucy and Sam did one of our more basic plans. But one of the things they did is we made sure that we had a power of attorney with what we call extraordinary powers. That's a really important term right there, extraordinary powers. We're going to talk about that in a second here. Extraordinary powers. So we had extraordinary powers. It allowed Sam to protect the assets in the event that Lucy went into a nursing home, which is exactly what happened. So what happens now? So now they come in and they tell us that Lucy's in the nursing home. We're able to apply for Medicaid. We get a Medicaid approved the first time. We protect 100% of the assets in favor of Sam. The house is 100% protected. The $400,000 is 100% protected. The $2,000 life insurance policy is 100% protected. We're able to protect everything. So you can see the contrast. It's literally that big of a contrast between doing some very basic planning and putting yourself in a better position and not doing that. Okay, seriously, we protected everything in favor of Sam, and still Lucy was able to qualify. So if you have a spouse in a nursing home, we most of the time can protect everything in favor of the non-nursing home spouse, or what sometimes I'll call a healthier spouse. And the nursing home gets paid. The nursing home got paid from the very beginning. They never had a gap in coverage where they didn't get paid. Medicaid was approved the very first time. Sam has enough money to pay for his care, pay for rides to the nursing home, all of that. Okay, let me put a variation on this for a second. We've got a second here. So what's the variation? What if we go back to the first thing and Sam and Lucy never did come in? They never came in and got those extraordinary powers, which I'll talk to you about in a second. They never did get their plan set up in such a way that we would be able to protect the assets. I can still help them, even in a crisis, even if they didn't protect themselves before that. And I could make it so that they don't have to spend down all of their assets. The difference is now I have to rely on a judge to give me that authority. Because if you haven't done the things to protect yourself, if you haven't put the things in place to protect yourself, I can still go into a judge and ask the judge for permission to do it. And very often the judge will grant this authority. But now now we have to go into a judge. It's going to be more costly. It's going to take more time. We're not going to be able to protect as many assets. And sometimes the judge could say no, right? So that's the idea. So planning ahead is going to put you in a much better position and make it so we don't end up having to go into court to accomplish this. But for those that maybe you have parents or somebody like that you say, okay, well, they just didn't do it. They didn't do any of this planning. So what do we do now? I can still help. I can still help them qualify for Medicaid and protect assets. I just have to get a judge's permission first. And it's going to be a little bit more costly. It's going to be a little bit more time consuming, but we can still do that. Okay. All right. So bottom line, what am I getting at? Long-term care, for when it comes to long-term care and protecting your assets from a nursing home, traditional estate planning is not enough. You might have the best estate planning attorney in the state of Michigan, and they drafted a will for you, they drafted a trust for you, whatever it is. That's not enough. They might have drafted powers of attorney for you, healthcare documents for you. Not enough if we don't have an eye towards protecting the assets from the nursing home. And there's a thing that we use specifically, and this is one example of how our documents are a little bit different, but the thing that I've been referring to back over and over again is this thing we call extraordinary powers. Extraordinary powers, all right? If it's extraordinary, that means they're not normal, they're not usual. And the extraordinary powers is the ability that you are appointing your spouse or your child or somebody else to be able to do this planning later. And it's extra authority that's not in a regular power of attorney, not in a regular will, and not in a regular trust, okay? And you have to have a lot of trust in the person you're appointing. You have to really trust them to give them extra authority. You better trust your spouse or your kid or whoever it is that you're putting in charge of it, because we don't want to give them extra authority unless we're completely confident that they would never take advantage of that, right? Okay, so if we have these extraordinary powers and if we've got that, or if we get a judge's order, what can we do? Well, with a married couple, I can typically, and again, it's not every case case by case, everybody's different, but in a married couple situation, I can typically get you qualified, one of them qualified for Medicaid, using those safe harbors that are hidden in the law, and usually protect up to 100% of the assets in favor of the healthy spouse or the non-nursing home spouse. What if it's a single person? Well, often we can protect the house, the car, and about 50% of the assets. Now that sounds kind of bad. We can only protect 50% of the assets. Well, what's the alternative? The alternative is we have to spend down to $2,000 and the house is exposed to estate recovery. So potentially we lose everything down to $2,000. Or with some planning, we can protect about half of it, okay, plus the house, plus the car. So, I mean, that's a pretty dramatic difference, right, between having to spend down to $2,000 or not. So that's the bottom line, and one of the big issues here, and there are a number of strategies, a number of techniques, a number of things that we would talk to you about when you come in to make sure that your plan is suited for your specific circumstances. But this is one of the things that if we have people that we trust and that we love, and that we're willing to give them extra authority, that's one of the things that we would put in there. Now, why isn't every attorney put that stuff in their documents? And there's a good answer for that. It's because if you're giving somebody extra authority, there's some danger there. They could abuse that authority, right? So most of the time in legal documents, we want to build in these protections and say, yes, I want to give my spouse the authority to pay my water bill for me if I'm in the hospital, but they can't just take all my money and put it in their name, right? Because you can imagine how that could be bad if you just got married last week or you got married in Vegas or something like that, But what if you've been married 61 years like Sam and Lucy? And what if we trust that, Sam and Lucy are going to take care of each other? Is it okay then to maybe have some of that? And that's just an example. There's a number of extraordinary powers. That's just one example of the ability to move the assets over to somebody else. But that could be looked like stealing if we're not doing it right. And so we wouldn't want to put that language in everybody's documents. But for Sam and Lucy that have been married for 61 years, or with somebody else that we have family members that we're confident that they won't abuse that authority, and we do put some restrictions on that. But the idea is to put extra authority, and that authority to move assets. That's not the end all be all. There's about 11 different things that we consider extraordinary powers that we include in your documents to make sure that if and when you go into a nursing home, we're going to be able to protect you. And like I said, it's not just nursing home; it's also home care. Qualifying for Medicaid home care. What not to do? What not to do is don't give money or assets away, okay? I had a call the other day. They said, my spouse needs to go to a nursing home. I was talking to my friend, and they said, all I need to do is just transfer all my money in my house to my kids. No, won't work. They'll deny you benefits, and now you lost your assets, and they'll penalize you. Don't add your kids' names to accounts. That won't help either. Adding kids' names to account will not help you one bit. It will still count as an asset, and it will not qualify for your Medicaid. Plus, it exposes that accounts to the liabilities of your kids. If your kids were to get divorced or run up some debts or lose their house to foreclosure or lose their job or have medical expenses, now your money's exposed to their problems. Okay, so don't add kids' names to your accounts or to your house. Don't just put your everything in the healthy spouse's name. Got that call the other day too, as somebody was told, oh, if you just take everything out of your husband's name and put it in your name, then you'll be able to qualify him for Medicaid. Nope, doesn't work. They're going to look at the assets that are in your name too. It's not going to work. And don't hide assets. Sometimes we'll have people say, oh yeah, I just have money stored up in my house. I joke when I hear that because I'll jokingly say, what's your address? Because they just told me they have a bunch of money stored up in their house. That's dangerous, number one. It also won't work because guess what? If you hide assets in your house and then you apply for Medicaid, what was that term we called that again? Oh yeah, it was a felony. Don't commit felonies. Are you going to get caught? I don't know if you'll get caught, but don't commit felonies. That's the one piece of legal advice I'm giving you today. Don't commit felonies, okay? But seriously, hiding money is not legal, and if they find it, they'll take it. Plus, it's dangerous because somebody may steal it from you and get away with it, or hurt you to get that money. So, bottom line, don't do that. Don't hide money in your house or have your kids hide money for you. That's a really bad idea, especially when there's things we can do to actually protect you, to legally protect you, okay? So I want to cover this, and we're going to do another webinar soon about some of these home care options. And we're hoping to have some guests on that webinar, but we'll talk about this soon on our webinar Wednesday about how do we get Medicaid to pay for some home care. So it's going to be a really good webinar. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that today. I just want you to know that it is, you know, a lot of what I've been referring to is if you have to go to a nursing home, but there's 2 Medicaid programs that can pay for home care, and they're different versions, and it's, you know, different amount of care and different kind of levels of care. One is called PACE, or the Program for All-Inclusive Care for the Elderly. PACE, P-A-C-E, Program for All-Inclusive Care for the Elderly. And it's a great program. Hopefully we're going to have one of the folks from PACE join us soon. And then the waiver program, which is a program that's community-based services where you could get somebody to come in and provide home care services in your home that can be covered by Medicaid. So like I say, we'll talk about those again in the future, but one of the things you need to understand is they're still Medicaid programs. So I talked a lot about nursing homes today. These other programs are still Medicaid programs. So everything I said about this as it relates to nursing home also relates to these home care programs. Okay. So I want to speak briefly about this. This is one of those things that I'll occasionally, I remember this was a while back, but somebody came to a class that I had done, and they said they didn't think it was right for us to be helping people qualify for Medicaid because they thought Medicaid was just for the really, really poor. And I had a couple of thoughts on that. First, I said, well, you know, do you think that there's government programs out there that people will try to put themselves in a better position, like taxes? So people that have a lot of money use the law in their favor to pay less taxes. Yeah, that happens all the time, right? So that's the same thing with Medicaid, you know, same thing with Medicare, frankly. And then, but the big one was this. I said, you know, I had somebody in my office the other day that had quadruple bypass surgery. And we started looking at the cost that Medicare paid for quadruple bypass surgery. Not even what Blue Cross paid, but actual Medicare. Medicare paid, and it was in the, by the time all was said and done with the hospital stay and the rehab and everything else that associated with it, it was well over $500,000 that Medicare paid for open heart surgery. What if that person had Alzheimer's instead? What if they had Parkinson's instead? What if they had dementia? What if they had something that doesn't require surgery? It requires supervision. It requires care. It requires ongoing care. How much is Medicare going to pay for that? Almost nothing. Medicaid will. So it's kind of that wheel of fortune. What disease did you get? On that wheel of fortune, when it comes to the government in the United States, if you get one disease, they're going to pay for most of it. They're going to pay for 80% of it, and you'll probably have insurance pay for the rest of it. You get another disease, you're saying we should go broke, we should lose everything, we should potentially lose our house and impoverish our spouse because of that, because you got the wrong disease? That doesn't make sense to me. And so that's what I'm saying is they built this into the law. We're just following the law. They change the law, we'll change what we do. But they wrote these rules into the law that says you can do things to protect yourself, to make sure you don't lose your house, that you don't impoverish your spouse, that you don't do these things, that you can protect your assets like Sam. We protected $400,000, a house, a car, the life insurance policy, all of that in favor of Sam, and it was protected forever. When I say protect, I never say protect for 10 minutes or 10 years. It's protected forever. We made sure that it was protected, and if Sam passed away, eventually that would go on to his family and things like that. Just like when the person that had open heart surgery, when their stuff was paid for, nobody asked them to, you know, give up their house after they die or anything like that. So it's just one of the things I think about. It was interesting because when I gave that analogy in the class that I was teaching, the person said, well, yes, but our tax dollars, I pay taxes into Medicare. Guess what? Yeah, I paid Medicare. You're right, but you also paid Medicaid. Every single check that you've ever gotten, every single time that you've gotten a payroll check, they took money out for Medicare and they took money out for Medicaid. So you've paid into both of these. These are the programs that you've paid for. And if you need it, then it's, you know, you decide for yourself whether it's appropriate or not. But in my opinion, I don't want you to lose your house. I don't want you to lose your assets because you got the wrong disease. All right, I think we're kind of wrapping things up for the day here. Let's make sure. What should I do now? My answer is please consider making an appointment with us. Okay. In a second, Savannah is going to come on the phone or on the line here, tell us if we have any questions to answer. But the big issue is she's going to tell you about how to get an appointment with us. And she's going to give you a couple of different options, a free option where you can kind of interview us, which I highly recommend you do that. You just interview us. It doesn't cost you anything, no commitment. You're not actually scheduling anything other than that interview. And so we can decide whether you're an appropriate client for us, and you can decide whether we're an appropriate attorney for you. And even if you have a will and a trust and all of that, what I'm saying is this is different than that, right? And so you're going to have an opportunity to interview us at no cost to you. The big thing is consider making an appointment regardless of the stage that you're in. If you have a loved one that may need nursing home or home care now, yep, you probably should schedule an appointment with us. And is there a cost to that? Well, there's no cost to interview us, but if you need legal advice, yeah, there's going to be a small cost to get that legal advice for us to be able to give you specific legal advice for your needs. It's a fairly small cost. But what if you're not there? What if nobody needs nursing home or home care or anything like that? My answer is we should still take a look at it, because there's some things you can do, like what I mentioned with Sam and Lucy, that you can set things up just if you need it in the future. So both of those situations, if it's a crisis or not a crisis, if you're just planning for the future, both of those times is well worth setting up an appointment with us. So Savannah, is there any questions for us to answer today?
Hi, nope, I don't see any questions in the chat box now. So if you do have a question, now is the time to go ahead and just put that in the box, and we can answer that before we wrap up today. And then, as Bob mentioned, we do have an easy way for you to contact our team if you do have a question, or if you did want to schedule that interview appointment. So you should have gotten an email probably about 15 minutes ago, 10, 15 minutes ago. So it should be in your email inbox now. That email will have the two options there for you to contact our team. So it'll have a way for you to click one button, and it'll take you to a calendar where you can schedule your own call. And it looks like we might actually have a question. So someone's hand is raised. It looks like Roz. Roz, do you have a question? If so, feel free to put it in the chat, and I'll go ahead and actually just type in the chat. I'll say hello so that you can see it. So yeah, feel free to type that question in the chat, and I'll follow up with you afterwards, Raj, just in case for some reason you can't get the question in the chat. It looks like here we go.
It says that she's self-muted, so we could try to unmute her, but she's self-muted. So if she can just type it in, that would work.
Okay. So Ross says that she missed why Sam and Lucy qualified for Medicaid when they had $100,000. This was before they had done any planning.
Okay, right. So they spent down to $100,000. They did qualify. They got approved at that point once they had spent down to the $100,000. They started out with $400,000, but they got down, once they spent down to 100, they qualified. It was just that Sam had given his car away a few months earlier, and because the car got given away, he ended up getting a penalty applied against him. And so he still had to private pay for a couple of months, even though he was approved for Medicaid. But then secondly, what happened was that after the first year, you have to recertify or reapply for Medicaid. And when he reapplied, he got denied because he didn't realize that he had to take Lucy's name off of everything. So no one told him that. He had a joint account with Lucy, and so they got denied in year 2. So he got Medicaid for 10 months, or Lucy got Medicaid for 10 months. But he got denied because in year 2, he needed to have Lucy's name off everything. So once he would have gotten Lucy's name off of everything, then Lucy would have gotten approved again. But there was that period of time where there was that gap that he had to pay out of pocket for. But in fact, in Sam's case, he died, and therefore then Lucy was applying on her own. Now we had a problem because we had that life insurance policy that had $2,000 in it. We had to either cash in or do something with that life insurance policy, because even though she didn't have any assets, that one asset of $2,000 life insurance policy was going to get her denied.
All right, thank you, Bob. And I hope that answered your question. And if not, please feel free to follow up. You actually can follow up, and this goes to Roz or anyone that has a question. That email that I was telling you about that should be in your inbox now. You'll have one option to schedule your interview appointment, where you can actually choose a day and time that works best for you. And Katie, our client services director, who's very nice, you will love her, she'll give you a call, just ask you a few quick questions and give you the opportunity to ask us a question. It also helps her determine which attorney would be appropriate for you to meet with. It's not always Bob. We actually have other attorneys that, kind of specialize in areas that Bob doesn't focus in as much anymore. So, it might be better for you to speak with one of them. So Katie will be able to determine that while you're on the call. Also in that email, you'll have a way to just contact us if you have a question. So you'll click a separate button and it'll take you to our website, and we have a contact us form. You'll fill out the web form. Just let us know your question or your concern or what it is you'd like for us to follow up with you about. And someone from our team will reach out to you within 24 business hours. You'll get a response. So again, I encourage you to check your email inbox, look for that email. It was sent just a little bit ago. Either schedule your interview with us, or you can just contact us with questions. And also stay tuned. Tomorrow, you will receive the replay for today's webinar. Thank you again, everyone, for attending. We're so happy that you could make it today, and we hope to hear from you soon.